Welcome back. We're going to now have a presentation and conversation with Ruang Rupa. This is Ade. Hello, Ade. We're missing you here. Ruang Rupa was established in 2000 and is a Jakarta-based artist collective. Members of Ruang Rupa are now in different parts of the world, including in Kassel, working with other disciplines such as the social sciences, politics, technology, education models, and media. Ruang Rupa seeks to share critical observations and views on contemporary issues. In 2018, they co-initiated Good School, which is a prolific model of a collective of collectives, really, in an ecosystem of study with Siram and Grafis Huruhara. The space for public learning was established to practice expanded understandings of collective practice and value. Ruang Rupa also produces collaborative works in the form of artistic projects, such as exhibitions, festivals, art labs, books, magazines, and an online journal. They have been involved in platforms ranging from Guangzhou Biennale to the Asia Pacific Triennale of Contemporary Art, the Singapore Biennale, Aichi Triennale, and various other forums. Most recently, they are the artistic directors of Documenta 15. Prior to this, they also directed Sonsbeek, which is a platform in the Netherlands. Welcome, and we really look forward to spending this time with you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, it's very strange. I have to watch myself. Is there any other way? This is very strange. Yeah. Please. Okay, that's better. That's better. That's better. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is very strange with Zoom, no? Like you talk to yourself. Thank you, Natasha, for introduction and everyone. Just Pratik. I'm sorry I cannot be there with you today. I wish next time we'll go there for sure. I suppose I accompanied by one other friend, Iswanto and Reza, but Reza cannot join because of other stuff. Iswanto, I think he missed the time. We'll see. I hope. Uh, with the time difference with Kassel with Germany, because I think last few days they changed the time from 1 hour. So yeah, thank you. How long, like how many hours we have? Oh, 30. Yeah. Okay, I try to be quick then. Can I share my screen? I'm going. I will go back to the old time of Ruang Rupa. This is. I'm going to tell stories. Just share my stories actually on how it's evolved throughout the years. Sorry, is it okay? Can you see the image? No, I cannot. No, I cannot. No, because you don't know my laptop. My laptop will do strange things when I do that. It's it's an old one, so I don't know what happened. It's already a few years. So yeah, let's. I hope it's okay. It's okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So this is our old first one actually. I mean, like we ruang rupa ruang it's space and rupa it's visual. I don't know. Maybe it's I think it's coming from Sanskrit as well. But we started without space in 2000. We started. I mean, like me and some other friends who started actually. We met each other in mid 90s, like 94, 95, when we were students. I don't have. No, I'm just too shy to show you our art school photos. But we met during that time, and then we started to do a lot of stuff in the city with many sporadic things in two cities in Jogja, because I was studying in Jogja in Indonesian Art Institute from 92 and 90s 98 I went to Rijks Academy, and then we still keep on discussing the ideas and so on. So when I come back in 2000 and we start and we think that okay, let's start it, because we think that we need a space. We need a space. So it's really coming from the necessity for space to meet together and also to live actually, because this is our house. We put our money together and then we rent a house after a year without space. uh, uh, I don't have better picture. Like the one, if you go see through, like that one is actually living room. Then we change it into a space for showing, meeting, and so on. And then this is the second one. So again, from house to house, and we change the function of the house from living room to for a meeting place, for exhibition. At least we call it exhibition. It's just like very simple exhibition space, and so this, for example, so we changed the house. A bedroom become sort of like office or archive or job space or library and so on. So it's really from this house. It's really different than of course. I mean, like so-called alternative space in Europe, for example, which is post-industrial. So it's always being like we use like warehouse or like factories or that kind of stuff. For us, it's like it's a post. I don't know, post domestic. uh, talking about that as well, it's really blurred the border of private and public as well, because when you close the gate and it's become our private space that we live there and so on. We share space, and then when we do something more public, and then we open, and then it's become public. So it's like the same space, but in. I start with this because this also show how we sort of like seeing which more or less collide in or like blurred in the same time. So like, or even tense actually. And I was in 2009 or 10. I forgot. I did a show on artist initiative or artist run space in Indonesia. So we invite like around 26, I think, initiative from different islands, from Sumatra, Java, and so on, and also to the east to Sulawesi and so on. So we asked them to send us any photos that can represent their practice. and most of them actually send this kind of photos. They use house, they sit on the ground, like some of you also there, and always like in a circle. Uh, and it's always like coming from the house, and also like this is also very interesting how art institution or art space that is actually imagined, that art institution or art organization, it's actually living or live among the neighborhood. Talking about this is because there is a disconnection as well. There is attempt to disconnect uh, or to alienate the art practice, or like even for example from 70s, even, because we have a long tradition of a collective or like self-organized or common communality and so on. So there's always a state or like power always see that as something that it's very threatening for the power. So there's always attempt on discouraging or like alienate this attempt to organize ourselves. Like in 70s, for example, there's systematic uh, from the government to push out or like to disconnect campus from surroundings, for example, because campus is always being a place where the very critical and like all like demonstration activism is really coming from the campus. So they try to neutralize that. And also like my campus, for example, in late 90s was pushed away from the city to like almost nowhere, in the middle of nowhere, in the south of Georgia. So there is a systematic, but again, like the idea of of being part of the people, or like art and also self-organized entities, it's still live and growing, and you can see how it's actually uh, uh, represented in, in, in this uh, uh, arts, like small art space, that emerge after end of 90s, after 98 especially, after Reformation. So this is Lumbung is basically a rice barn. Hello. Oh, like here? Okay. Wow, sorry. Now I forgot what. Yeah, yeah. This is a space in our space that is actually a living room. If you see, I will move on with more slides that's actually showing what happened in the same space in this space. It's like exhibition. We put some lights. We paint the wall white, and then it's become exhibition space. People can have presentation, talks, and so on, and also being occupied by people in the surrounding. Uh, is when we get the meeting happenings always being in sort of like an assembly kind of in a rotation or in a circular in a circle. And of course, music. It's a very a strong connection, music and arts in our scene. Hello, Mas Bro. There's Iswanto.
Hello. Sorry. Yes. Can you hear me better? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Mas Bro, I'm just explaining about like starting with the house and so on, our house and how it's functioning. Yeah. Yeah. So if you have something, just jump in.
Okay.
And we use also for class discussion and so on. So it's like something that like we really loud or can be also become like very reflective and calm, like education and so on. So it's like really this one space become kind of like a space for almost many things. This is where, of course, this is where always after we had a meeting aftermath, and so Lumbung itself, something that it's naturally there since we set ourselves in the house, gathering in the house, and so on. Lumbung itself is a rice barn. It's agraric tradition in Indonesia. I think this resonates with many other cultures as well, with storing not only rice but also seeds, some surplus, so they can use it also in the future for sustainability, and also celebrated by a lot of rituals and so a lot of performance, really performative and also very sonic in the same time. So for us, Lumbung itself, I mean, like we live in Jakarta. It's an urban environment, but Lumbung itself, it's lives as a concept in our head. And many times we use that as a model of sharing resources. There is a very good long essay actually by Melanie Budianta. She did research on Lumbung that still live in Jakarta, in small alley in Jakarta, because in Indonesia, urban and rural, it's actually always exchanging imagination. You know, like our urban is really built by a rural imagination, and also vice versa. So it's been always in conversation. So this is Iswanto's drawing on Lumbung and Sasak tribes. And this is also like a practice that we have to challenge ourselves as well. You know, to setting up a limit, like self-limit, because like for example, how we define surplus, how we define sufficiency, and so on. So it's really something that we exercise all the time, and towards the commenta and also towards some years, we sort of like evolve this practice more structured, more mechanical, I might say, as a model. So we're setting up. We found at least several values that evolve in the Lumbung practice. You know, like there's a generosity, there is locally anchored, endurance, regeneration, sufficiency, ethics, transparency, of course, humor also, and independence. So these things sort of like we try to set this as something that we found. It might change, it might edit it also by other people and so on. But so far, when we sort of like when we do it like for throughout decades, this is at least several values that sort of like emerge and can be as enabling the Lumbung itself. So since 2013, actually, since 2013, we're setting up a collective with other groups in Jakarta, like two other groups, Grafis Huruhara and Serum. They are from pedagogic art pedagogic background. So it's really something that really totally foreign, but also not something that we know much about as well. So it's like it's really great collaboration with them, to setting up Lumbung with them together. And we started like a first couple of years. Started with sharing just like ideas, facilities, spaces, intangible and tangible resources as well. Money is actually the last one. Even we work already for many years, but we shared our money. I think in the last 3-4 years, so everyone is actually can use everyone's money. So Lumbung, as in not as centralistic, not as a central pot that money is actually stored, but like everyone have their own pot or bank account, but everyone is actually can see by transparency can see each other's resources. So through Majelis, through assembly, we discuss and then we solve others' needs and also surpluses. So everyone is actually can see each other's resources and can propose to each other that they can use or they can shift and so on. So this is our compound since 2018 in the south of Jakarta that we develop. It's around 700 square meters for spaces and classes, and then we're setting up also collective studies. It's 1-year program for people who would like to study or learn together with us about collective practice in many ways, including also developing like alternative economic model and sustainability and so on. It's been really great that slowly also become international or regional. Last 2 years, we also work together, or we share some knowledge with others in the region. So this is sort of like a simple scheme of the lumbung that we have in the good school. So there's a self-sustainability group of people that work on how we should generate income and other resources. And in the right bottom is actually a list of initiatives and collectives that are here around, and the people is actually also overlapping and so on. So we have like more or less like 50 people that work almost every day here, and the knowledge sources which is coming from good school itself as a research, as a educational platform for collective practice. So, and then like these three things are together and connected, and in the middle is actually the majlis, the assembly that we have more or less every month. That of course during COVID we just do it online, but it's always being sort of like assembly place for everyone to share their experience, ideas, or hangouts, and just like timeless conversation. Not necessarily solve the problem, but just like sharing all the things that we experience. So this is the place actually. And the next to it, there is like 22 studios. We separate them to many other artists, designers, architects, like small publishers as well, and so on. This is just like the upstairs of the places actually. Mas Bro, you want to add?
Yeah, just shortly maybe about this. I think we take all of this. It's all the materials that we built. Also, we try to be as sustainable as possible. So we use the remains from the Jakarta Biennale at the time now, bro. Maybe I think I remember 60% or 70%.
Don't tell anyone. Actually, don't tell anyone.
Actually, the rest is renovation. So the main building where it's Futsal Stadium before, it's small. So
if you see the pillars is coming from a drum. The pillars is coming from the, how you call it?
Oil drum.
Yeah, metal drum.
Yeah.
And yeah, this is from containers, yeah, and then with it's used pallet wood.
Yeah, maybe I think that's, we can add it when discussion.
Yeah. Of course, karaoke. So it's this is like one of the assembly. And this is 2016, a little bit back on how we actually apply again, because our practice is really emerged from the space itself. So when they appoint us as curator in Sonsbeek in 2016, this is what we do. I mean, like Ruru House itself as a space, we try already several times before as artist or as curator as well. Like really like space making, or like even like small organization making in a certain local is as a base, as a root for our artistic or curatorial practice, and then we grow from there. And this is what we did in Sonsbeek. we opened this Ruru House like 1 year before the exhibition itself, and then from there, from like organizing the space, we connect, we work together with artists and so on. Even we invite artists that involved in the project. We'll use that space as sort of like a place to like a part of stories and experience as well. So this is just like many activities that we have in Ruru House. So it's really and then coming from there, and then we can, it's like our sensoric tools, or that we use when we are working in one particular context. That it's from there, and then grow into either collaboration or many other practices that people might, I mean, like the audience will experience it as an artwork, for example, or as an engagement and so on. But for us, it's something also important, that just us being there, and then as a person, as a human as well, with the space, breathing and together with everything and everyone in that space, in the city, and then slowly grow into something, another relation. Do we have still time? No? 5 minutes. Okay. This is Documenta 15. So, so again, so we apply again the Ruru House. Iswanto and Reza moved to Castle for 2 years before the exhibition itself.
2020, yeah.
2020, and then it's become sort of something that makes us rooted there, and then also make Castle as a local, because and then only by doing that, the interlocal conversation can be happen with others in other parts of the world, because that's the idea, like not only seeing Castle as a center, but also thinking how it's actually the practice, the artistic, the aesthetics, and also the knowledge can cycle back to where it's belong, or where the first ecosystem is actually coming from, because this is also our model, trying to not to see or not to practicing the extractive act or mode that like a big event or like a big exhibition is actually always doing, like sucking or like absorbing, extracting everything to one space and time, and calling it exhibition, which that's what happened in Documenta, of course, like even they call it Museum of 100 Days, like it's a very divine, 100 days, like not before, not more, so it's like really divine. That's to do that, we try to see the time as a journey, like Lumbung is actually longer than Documenta, and then we see Documenta as one of the step, or like one of the phase of the longer Lumbung journey. I think only by that we sort of trying to see the or to challenge the representational way of exhibition making. So so we deal with space, with Ruru House, and time with putting Documenta itself as part of our longer journey. Of course, we deal with a lot of structural issue because it shows also that how we work is also really production based, and also really I call it like a very set of time, kind of like a durational divine time concept, while we try to sort of like stretch that. And in terms of resources, so it's a long process with implement this lumbung not as a theme, because theme is rather in the center always, and then art and artwork sort of like trying to react to that theme in the middle. So what we did first time is actually take out to delete to delete the theme. So lumbung we apply as more like as a concept, as method, like even protocols. We wrote a lot of mechanism actually during the process. So it's become like holistic, kind of like operating system. So what audience might see even is actually the class of the operating system that we install, that we apply in Documenta, and naturally naturally also it influence or change actually how we research, or how in our conversation with the artists during the preparation, because and then we're not really searching for artworks. We are searching for people with those values in their practice. Are they working really with the ecosystem, for example, and so on, and also what kind of model that they have, what kind of practice that they have, what kind of collective values that they have. So really interested in who that in the long run that we would like to work with and to learn from as well, rather than to make exhibition. Actually, I think exhibition is actually like really coming in the end. I was actually personally quite surprised that it's end up in exhibition. So so this is one of the process, it's we setting up several networks, so like a lumbung artists, lumbung interlocal, and lumbung also in Kassel, and lumbung Indonesia as well. And then we involve many artists that grouped in a certain way that they can share their resources, they can share also artistic practices, and also possible collaboration. And they can also involve their own ecosystem. That's why if you read maybe about the commenter, I don't know really exactly what number actually that involves, but it's like many. But what we involve officially is actually sort of like around 60 collective and artists, but then
74.
74, yeah, Mas Bro. Thank you. And then it sort of like ripple or like spiral out the involvement into thousands of involvement, because that's the idea as well, like sharing the invitation to others. Yeah, this is the translation that it's always sort of like it's not only like one way, it's always sort of like a conversation amongst, or like between like the local ecosystem and also Kassel, so it can like a cycle back, or sort of like a constant conversation. I think I'm going to stop there. Otherwise, we don't have time to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think the questions are really also going to be a way to continue from where you left off. So to start with, I actually just wanted to go to a quote from an interview that I found that was quite an interesting provocation. I'm just going to read it. Horizontality is not a value in itself. Sometimes it's actually not a smart move to be horizontal, but it becomes useful in order to show that there is a plethora of ways to imagine and practice things differently than the destructive methods the mainstream is using right now. Furthermore, working horizontally also means that you have to decentralize yourself again and again. I found this really useful, actually, because it kind of made me reflect that we use certain terminologies like horizontality without thinking about them in an analytical way, without sort of thinking about the inscribed unevenness, also depending on the different ecologies within which we emerge. So I'd love to just, leave, if you could sort of reflect back to us on that. And how it worked like that also in Documenta, where of course it was a very open format, but then at the same time, the values, the Lumbung values, also enabled a constant this sort of decentralizing oneself again and again.
Yeah, I think like many times it's because it's really based. I think it should be based on practice because I don't think it will work in thematical way because again like conceptually theme as well it's always in the center, like so it is already a there is a power relation there. So and we have to challenge all the time, and there is no somehow like there is no other way sort of like to break like one by one, and of course some like or many things it's actually doesn't work because it's just like traditionally it's sort of like being structured as in vertical a structure. That's why the first one that we try to break is actually our position. Of course, it's not easy at all because like it also shows how art works is actually very centralistic and very very vertical. Let's say like the term or like our position as artistic director, like that's like the first thing that we sort of like creates or like the trying to destruct by share our power into artistic team and also into the Lumbung interlocal that we involve, and then slowly all the decision making it's sort of like shared and rolled in a certain way that it can be more transparent and it can be more challenged from many different angle, and also to rotate as well, like to rotate the role and so on, because that's actually something that we learned as well, how to do that in the it's not like power is not accumulated in one position, but that if we cannot avoid that, maybe like to rotate the relation is actually also something can be strategized. But yeah, it's many stories, of course, that we have to deal with. I mean, exhibition itself, it's not horizontal. Exhibition inherently, it's not horizontal. Like place, for example, a place of like how people see in Kassel, for example. But so we challenge all the time, like what does that mean to be in Kassel? But what does that mean also for people in Jatiwangi, for example, being in Documenta, and so on. So like those cycle mode of question is not easy to apply, but we keep on address that in our approach. Yeah, Pastro, you wanna add? I hope I answer your question
Yeah.
or comment.
And maybe the next one,
Yeah,
just want to,
I
you want
would
to say
say as
something?
well.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
No, I just want to add a little bit. I think that it's as well. I would say it's decentralized. Maybe it's as I did say, it's a power really. I think since beginning, but looking back as well as in the first slide where Ruang Rupa was started in the house, I think that's as well because in those era we are living in a very centralized government regime during the Suharto. Everything was centralized in Jakarta, in Java. But I think the ideas to build these small cultural spaces where Ruang Rupa is one of it is to decentralize, I think, to be in paradox with those power relation those time. And I think that's influenced a lot of the way we work and as well in Castle. I mean, not as well when we started to choose the place, the space, you know, the venues and so on, we already start consciously thinking how to decentralize the, you know, because we learn from Documenta first till 14 that everything is centralized in the center, especially with culminated in the Friedrichianum, Museum Friedrichianum, and then with surrounding. But yeah, then we start decentralize those spaces, but as well as I did say with power relation of as well decision making, and it's also appear consciously where in Ruang Rupa, in Good School, in Jakarta, even before Good School, how we work is on those ideas of, you know, this, and it's came in every project that we have as well, in institution, in Vienna House and so on, where we invited as an artist. I think that's why the approach is always attached to our ideas as well.
And maybe just continuing on that thread, as you already mentioned that it wasn't, for you, it wasn't sort of necessary that Documenta 15 would sort of end up in an exhibition or an exhibition of exhibitions, or, you know, sort of obviously you're already stretching that concept in incredibly generous and dramatic ways. But we did speak briefly, Ade, in Kassel as well about just how, given the kind of venues that were selected, this immense range of venues, you're also using the city in very different ways. You're using neighborhoods that have not been used to the extent that they have in this edition. And so clearly there was a lot of dialogue involved in the ways that artists wanted to use those spaces. And it would be great to kind of just have a little bit of an understanding of, you know, that sort of behind the scenes in a sense, because I understand that it wasn't you all kind of making those decisions on behalf of the Lumbung members, but yeah, could you kind of guide us through some of that process a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah, just share a bit on how we, I mean, like we many first like many of organizations collectives that we involve also have their own way to deal with the space and also in their own practice. So like the question again, like what's actually the benefit of being in Documenta, like showing in 100 days or like making activities and so on can be sort of like being cycled back to or benefiting their practice back home. So this is one thing that artistically as well actually influence how it should be presented in Kassel. So that's why also like many venues become unvenues. It's not like venues. It's like a living space as well. It's like organism. It's actually naturally coming from many practices as well. That's why actually I started with how we live and work in the house. So like artistic and domestic is actually kind of like together, like music, kitchen, living space. There is we changed Fridericianum maybe for the first time in the history of documentary, become also a dorm. So like people living there for 100 days, even more, and many venues as well become their living space. So and then we batch them, or like we organize sort of like so the artist can activate the space, or like being there in the space as a host for 100 days. This is really a big management work, but seeing that as an aesthetics, as a even as a politics as well of the space. And we don't really design so much actually as in, I mean, like we as in exhibition curator. So what we did is actually I think there's a one time that we can fly many artists to come to Kassel, and then we just like walk with them together, and then seeing the space that we have, like Ruru House, for example, and other space. Some is actually traditionally always being used for documenta, but also many are not. It's actually coming from the finding of us, and together with the artists, like experiencing the city. So we don't really choose the space and then sort of like locate artists who and where, so it's like really it's a collective decision, and even like some venues that being chosen by several artists, and then we apply majlis, we apply assembly, so like we in conversation with all the artists, and then also our production team and so on, sit together and then decide together who should go where, and then how to design. So it's really, and some venues is actually in decision like half a year. Like this process is like taking so much time. Maybe Iswanto can speak more about that with the venues. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's completely right. I think as mentioned, we are not cutting the cake into pieces and then distribute it for the artists, but we rather take approach that the artists, because locally anchored and working with communities is one of the main, mostly for all the artists. So being secure and comfortable with the surroundings, I think that's the important thing. So we give it open decision for the artist to choose where they want to be. And yeah, this process, as Adi said, this takes lots of risks, takes a longer time, especially lots of conflict as well between the artists. And, but that's the most interesting part, because at the end, actually, through the majlis, as Adi said, they manage the space together. to distribute the programs and also to solve many problems with sound, with the light, and so on. So how the venue works actually, let's say in one space, one venue, one buildings, there are 4, 5, 6 artists live together, and some of them are really live there every day. So they manage together collectively the space, which is very much interesting that is happening during the process actually. And yeah, so there are so many collective process which is came out through the process itself actually.
Thanks. Yeah, I had the privilege to be at Documenta twice. Once at the very beginning and once at the end, and one could really see in action this sort of these principles. And in terms of curators often, or let's say curators in this kind of with their professional hats of being curators end up often saying that their exhibition will look different in the beginning and then it'll transform, and they kind of use all of these terminologies, and often that's simply not the case. It's often like an artificial sort of way of saying, it often a way of sort of maybe even pressurizing a certain mode of process-led work rather than actually thinking the way that y'all have from the very beginning and from so many years of practice. I think that's what came across so strongly in the way that you presented today, that this is not something that is just generated when the invitation comes, but it's something that is just inherent in building vocabularies together. I was also really thinking, perhaps with the audience here who may not have had the chance to visit, if you could maybe give some examples in terms of, what happened in the Fridericianum, let's say, when different kinds of educational or pedagogic structures and entities came together, with different kinds of archives came beside each other from very different parts of the world, whether that's sort of Keleketla library or the Black Archives, or sort of these very, very precious infrastructures that have been sustained really against the odds, against very severe political realities, finally having the chance to share space in that one building. Maybe if you could, maybe share with us some anecdotes from what really happened there when they could be present in this way over so many months.
Yeah, Fridericianum it's a good example to actually to sort of like to show also the whole. One of the things that we change, I mean, like many things happen, or like many things that we have now in exhibition making, is actually also something to do with the economy behind it, no? So in order to to change that, we have to change the economy of Documenta as well. I try to be fast on this, but there's so many things actually. But just like one example, for example, we don't use because it's not a theme, so it's not. So we change the logic of I call it commission, for example, because commission is imagining bilateral trading mechanism or like model, like organizers as producers or client, and artists as artistic service provider. And that's what is exactly happened. So we don't use that idea. So we change it into, even in the contract, is actually just like one simple contract that like several parties agree on a certain values, rather than I commit or like artists commit to one, and then we have another contract for like more detailed one. So we changed that, and then we changed the fee into seed money, because as a respect to what they've been doing before, now, and also after. So it's sort of like unconditional resources that being given to the artists as in respect to their practice, and also the production costs. We equalize the production costs, so it's actually all the same. Not all the same. That just like collective and individual is it's different, but like all the collective the same, and all the artists are the same. And then we group into the mini majlis, which so they can share their knowledge, experience, artistic practice, open for collaboration, and also they can share what we call a collective pot from for each mini majlis. So there's a amount of money, like a lumbung pot money that they can use collectively, and then they have to decide also collectively, and it's self-organized. Each mini majlis is usually consists of like 5 until 7 artists, and then we divide it just because it's we communicate by Zoom, so we divide it by time zone, so they can self-organize themselves, and then they can collectively decide what to do with the collective pot. Some will propose for their own individual project, for example, but if everyone agree, and then it is fine. Some can be for collaboration, some for even for their own ecosystem. They want to invite more artists, for example, from the ecosystem. That's why it's rippling out. And then even there's artists that say that like, this is too much, I will give my pot money into others. So it's really really this lumbung practice, sort of like exercise or challenge in each mini majlis. While the Friedrichianum is actually has its own majlis with like so many members. We envision like to change the Friedrichianum that traditionally is always a center, like people is always going there for the first time. So we changed it into more intangible approach as its knowledge. So it's actually like a bucket, or like a big pot of knowledge, and then we call it the Fried School, like Friedrichianum as a school. So we involve like many artists or collectives that addressing or like speculating different kind of knowledge production and also educational model. So that's what happened, and then they actually Iswanto will know much better. I didn't involve in the Majlis Friedrichianum so much, but it's like really like even the layout and everything is actually we work together with them to sort of like designing the layout and so on, how to evolve. You know, like there's a common library, there is a common space for daycare for babies and kids and parents, and then also for classes and dorm and so on, kitchen as well. Yeah, so it's really something that really demanding time and energy as well. Collective practice. I think we experienced this for many years, of course, but it's really. Efficiency, it's not the word, you know, it's like collective practice, it's totally inefficient. But it's
Slow.
it's very slow, effective, better, maybe not efficient, but it's more effective. It can be faster, but certainly more beautiful. Maybe it's one that can add more.
Yeah, I think the very much interesting case of Friedrichianum as well is the unpredictable event that happened there. Let's say in Good Kitchen behind the Frediciano, maybe have you experienced that because every night there are so many unplanned event that's happening there. So it's suddenly everybody come and decide together what to do, and then they decide to do party, to do cooking, to do karaoke, whatever. So it's like just flowing during the 100 days, like continuously without like you have proper plan that this has scheduled and so on, and they decided all together with not only just from the majelis of the Fredicianum part, but it's extended with multi layers, not only other participants, but even with the guests who come and join the event. And it's important to add as well, I think the process of Fredicianum is very interesting case as well, because it's quite a long discussion from the Majelis since maybe about a year before the opening. I think how they decided to run it together and continuously work together of how to program, how to, as I mentioned about how to exchange with the ideas of education, knowledge production, and but as well in designing process. And for example, this one, the common library on the and the rubrics was a project collaboration by Sorab Patke from India and Elwarsa from Tunisia, and with us to help to support the production and so on. So with our production team together. So I think this is really circular design process, and also in collaboration and work together with cycling material networks from Kassel mostly, but as well from other part of Germany to support for the materials and to be used by artists and so on. And yeah, this is one of the most important part as well that Adik mentioned since beginning. Why Ruruba is here as well is to rethink how exhibition making. I mean, challenge what the Documenta has been before, but now, yeah, this is kind of this is the common library that in the
Yeah, this is the common library and like meeting space, like all the artists can organize their discussion here, not only from Fridericianum but also for others, and also we have as well what is it? Like this one is actually a Lumbung Press. This is a mural of Brito from Bangladesh, and this is a work from Banor from Thailand. And we have a common Lumbung Press, we call it. So any artist during 100 days can print any printing material that they want, flyers, small booklets, brochures, and so on. And this is, so like this common facility is really coming from the a big majlis, because we have mini majlis, and then we have we call it Majlis Akbar, like a great assembly. That's like 100, like 200 people can come join together, and we did it like several times during the process, and then we decide like all the money that can be from the pot, or like even from production budget, to shift into a common needs, like press, for example, and then also this one, like the library, for example, and so on.
Sorry, we're somewhat running out of time. Would it be all right if we just take maybe one or two questions, And we also have chance for further discussion after our participants from the 2 days will be actually gathering tomorrow. So hopefully you will also return and we can kind of engage in further reflection together. But for now, I'd love to see if there's someone in the room who wants to ask something or. I'm just gonna wait for a minute.
Hello. I wanted to ask in your years of documentation, does the process eventually gets codified? Like like you are doing it for quite a long year. So you said a lot of things stay free, but among the participant, does does things get codified, like things working in a certain way, and does it, yes, does it get structural, more structural, or it just stays something very, uh, yeah, I was not looking for free, but more scattered kind of thing. Yeah, amorphous is a better word, I think.
Uh,
Can you
I don't
repeat
get.
the
Yeah, I don't
question?
get the first half actually. Sorry.
So I'm just going to try to paraphrase, but please correct me if I don't get it right. Basically, just since you have been working for a long time together, and certain part of the approach is a recurring one. There are certain principles that are recurring. Do you feel that you're able to actually maintain the fluidity, the amorphousness of it, the scattered nature of the work, or do you feel like that itself, having worked together for so long in a certain way, also makes the practice structured? And there's a certain, then it becomes a kind of a model in itself that arrives. That's I think the question.
Okay, I try. I hope. Yeah. Yeah. We kind of like always back and forth, like sort of like into like a step into two sides, like formal informality and structure and more organic and so on, and we always do that all the time. And I think I mentioned before about rotating as well. Like for many years, uh, we it's almost instinctive, this amongst us, like among ourselves, like this rotation of roles and and position, like who's listening, who's talking, and so on. Silence or loud, like those things. And it can be structured. It can, or sometimes it needs structure. Like Lumbung itself somehow kind of like structure that that actually can hold this. I mean. Lumbung itself is not only concept. I mean, like in it is exists as architectural function. So it has a physical function or existence, but also in a concept. So that's why it's a very interesting model that somehow we inherently or naturally have it in our mind, but also it's really inspiring as well, architecturally or like physically. If I may go back to my slides, I don't know if I can, but this is also we just Yes, very quick. So this is actually like a physical structure of a complete lumbung, actually, traditionally. Like there's a storage when we store the rice, and then there's a domestic function also, and then also social as in the bottom. So and then this is really also inspired us, sort of like, or like even can represent what we are doing actually. I mean, like, we can speculate, maybe this is how we actually define our art and life, which is actually coming together, like knowledge, private, social. So and while in practice, we when it's getting too structured, and then I think humor should kick in to sort of like deconstruct that, and we have that sort of in more like a sensible and instinctive way as well. I mean, like, we worked together for many years. And while we work together with Lumbung artists, like for the last 2 or 3 years, like many of them, of course, we know each other for a long time as well. But like, I think time is a very crucial element also in the Lumbung model.
Thank
Hope I
you.
answered
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, no, thanks so much. That's great. It was great to see as well that model once again really on screen. I think that made a big difference. Sort of think about also architecturally, infrastructurally, how the thinking has taken shape. I have so many more questions for you. Hopefully, if you return tomorrow, it'd be great to kind of continue. Also, given the sort of the challenges really that have taken place, the kind of growing hostility that there has been around this generous effort and growing exercise with so many members, that itself is, at least in this part of the world, I think for us important to critically reflect on where that hostility comes from, what it actually is dampening and censoring, which is actually very innate in our political systems of strife. So I think that's something that we can also jointly think about together, as well as the forms of continuum, because this call of Lumbung acting and being also elsewhere and everywhere, I think is something that is a joyous and brave response that we all kind of feel very connected to. So hopefully, we can also come to some of those aspects tomorrow in conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We're going to now invite Ashok Sukumaran, who's joining us from Bombay. And as Priyanka also mentioned in the morning, Ashok is a part of CAMP group and studio since 2008. I first heard Ashok speak in public in 2008 when I was at JNU. And it's been just such a privilege to sort of follow the practice of CAMP, even from a distance and on the occasions that we've been able to convene in different sites. There's such a, once more, I think this connects really interestingly to Ruang Rupa, very differently so, which is what it has meant to stay committed to building artistic and media infrastructures. Welcome, Ashok.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the non-formal introduction. There's also more space, a little bit space in the back if people want to move.
Actually, Ashok will be seated here because he wants to control the computer. So those of you who can't see him, make yourself comfortable somewhere close to him.
So I'll start with some comments and then go to the. I don't know if you noticed a lot of in the previous presentation, this click to add title. Yeah. So I thought that, at least in part, my presentation gives you some title and then no images, at least for the first part. Because I also feel that, if you look around this room, there are, at least 2 static cameras, probably 7, 8 CCTV cameras, a stream going out to the world, images of videos of, for example, indigenous people in power. So images of videos of people, photographs of PowerPoints of videos of people on a stream. There are layers and layers of mediation. Some of these are actually, in some sense, hierarchical. And I want to talk about this aspect of it, right? And then this kind of world that we live in, but somehow, as we read from our iPhones about these, images or videos of people on PowerPoints far away, like we seem to be able to talk about a kind of horizontal relation with them, but it's not really so simple, right? It's textured by all these things which also have economic and political and sensual meaning. So I'm misrepresenting one of the senses that's missing here by saying that here is a taste of, and the reason this came up was that this was actually an informal talk I gave to the experimenter team when they came to Bombay. And I was talking about some things in our world, in our studio, that were sort of not really maybe seen or shown or exhibited in any formal sense, but they formed the sort of back end or the invisible aspects of what we do. And I wanted to bring them back into some realm of sensibility. And it's structures that actually intersect, permeate everything else, including what I'm saying and doing now. There is an old statement in 2011 from a VC, and this was in the context of an introduction to experimenter to Bombay, to a kind of capitalist realism of the city, but also of the other kinds of things that are happening there, including in our neighborhood and so on. And I was using a vertical model to describe some of these processes, right? So I'm continuing with that, and I'm not trying to say that we should now, everything should be vertical or should we go back to hierarchy, but I'm saying that there are hierarchies everywhere. There are dependencies everywhere, and there are other kinds of words that we can talk about, and we should try and explore that. And I'm doing it through a particular, let's say, story about technology. So software is eating the world, which was 2011 statement by a well-known VC company, which many people say turned out to be true. There are so many software companies extracting value from all kinds of interactions, including all our messaging, all our projecting, all our streaming, all the zooming, everything is being harvested, right? So how can we eat software, and what does it taste like, if there is such a thing? So how to sense that eating relation, which I sense as a kind of vertical relation, parasitic relation, differently, as a specific place of invention, as a non-monetary ecosystem, right? Because the whole, if you remember, the promise of the digital was that there were infinite copyability, there was like almost infinite transferability. All of this had costs, right? But that was the promise. And we shouldn't take it for granted that when we search for a text online and we find a PDF for free, that's not, we shouldn't take that also for granted, right? That involved somebody's risks and somebody's bodily sort of labor and a lot of other things. Right? But it is really centered around this imaginary that it is not a monetary relation, right? It's another kind of thing. as a set of potentials, as support, as infrastructure for and as art, for art, but also as art. When the old institutions, when the old kinds of support systems, the national government funding, the traditional schools of art, a lot of these are, as in the board game Pandemic, I don't know if any of you played that during the pandemic, they are faded, right? They're in trouble, right? And of course there are other kinds of trouble, as there's no shortage of bad news, right? But I want to say that, so these technical, digital, I want to introduce this back in the room because I also found it in a way completely missing in the discourse around Documenta this year. We were in Documenta in 2012, and we were probably the only, if I'm not wrong, the only internet project where we worked using Padma, which is a footage archive we run, on a long and quite, in a way, complicated and interesting project around Afghan films, which are still available on Padma. And now, post the Taliban takeover, had a very important sort of story that happened after that. We were accused of stealing national treasures and so on and so on. But this kind of thing only happens when, we were in a particular sort of weird parasitic relationship with that. We had no business being there and so on, right? So just to say that, and the second year, like in the Documenta context, since we were talking about that, I think in 2017, we were on a TV show, so it was really like old technology. We were streaming to Greek television, one of our films. And I don't remember really any internet projects, right? And also this year. So in a weird way, like this hasn't been part of the discussion around a lot of these major institutional sort of exhibition contexts, even though everything else, I mean, I'm very sympathetic to the Lumbung concept, but I want to today look at it vertically. So the story begins with two sort of canonical examples. They are sort of cartoonish, so forgive me, but one is from the sort of, let's say, the business ontology, or like the kind of abstraction as it works in business theory, let's say, and the other is in media theory, right? So these two are just a lead up to what I'm going to say, right? So let's look at the example of Reliance, like Dhirubhai Ambani, 1960. So Reliance is one of the most, let's say, successful, dominant, almost state-level, powerful, everywhere in every sort of vertical, as they call it, across Indian landscape, right? And elsewhere, probably now in other countries as well. So what was, when somebody like the founder of the large industrial conglomerate in, say, the mid-60s, looking at India from, say, Aden across the Indian Ocean, at a space that's already been like commercial capitalism, right? Jairus Banerjee wrote a book about how the industrial capitalism didn't happen in the 18th century in London or wherever. It was a much older sort of process of extraction of, which he calls commercial capitalism, as a non-industrial, right, trading. So what happens, and they call it that, it's called backwards integration, right? The Reliance way of dealing with, and it's a very vertical, let's say, concept where you move from this trading world where you're sort of you're taking benefits of difference in costs in different places and so on, to actually industrial capitalism proper, that is making things, right? And in their case, you go sort of up the chain, and in a way this, my non-PowerPoint is wrong because it's the other way around. Like you go backwards up the chain from textiles to cotton to producing the yarn, right? This is a supply chain risk management issue, okay? To say, okay, the season has changed, so polyester yarn is more durable, et cetera, et cetera. But to make polyester, you need to refine petroleum. So, of course, then it ends up in the largest refinery in the world in Jamnagar, right? And then that goes backwards from there into oil and gas exploration in the Indian Ocean, Arabian Sea, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a story of, say, one vertical of polyester yarn backwards into oil and gas in the ocean, right? It's this kind of image. And then there are, of course, others, including data, which they now have, and so on, right? It's debatable whether data is the oil of the 21st century or oil is the oil of the 21st century, but that's another matter. So the second example is a media story. This is to do with AI, right, which is a sort of buzzword. But the simple version, and these are all, again, cartoons, that the classic media theory, the McLuhan-esque or whatever media theory, is that every new medium takes the old medium as its content, right? That's the mediation, like the big sucking machine, right? And so in the simplified version, there is a world in which language, the invention of language as a technical form, right, converts worldly experience into stories and conversations, which that can pull into the new medium of newspapers, telephones, and novels. Right? The content of newspaper and novels are stories and conversation from before. Radio and movies take all the content, like movies are based on novels. Television is made of movies and literally like people reading the radio news, except like good-looking people, in the beginning. So, right? And then the internet, like Netflix is made of TV serials basically, and so on and so on. And so each and then social media sucks at all these sort of forms of human communication and puts it on the internet, where it is sucked at by something called AI. Now, I'm just saying that this is partly true. I mean, all these are not complete or definitive things, but they allow us a way to at least acknowledge the sheer sort of force of these forms of extractive industry, right, let's say. Right? And also some of their, let's say, powers on us, even though we may not acknowledge them, right? Now, I wanted to show a quick image of an AI example. No, sorry, just at the top of this. Very quickly, maybe. Curators 1.png, let's try that. So this was my first result this morning of an AI rendering image of a curator's hub in Kolkata. First result. Yeah. Yes. It was generated in like 10 seconds. I can't do this on this machine, but yeah. So this image, this photograph does not exist. Then I added the word contemporary, which produced this rather, dramatic thing. And then, sorry, not 32, obviously. I didn't have that many. And this one, which is... So, I mean, looking around the room, I think we are doing better than this already, right? For sure. So the thing is that, so this reveals something about this pyramidical structure that I've been talking about, right? That it can only suck at the past, right, in a certain sense. Like, of course, there are ways to hedge on future things and so on. But this form of, this image is actually sucking at all the paintings, about all the movies, about all the conversations, about all the worldly things we felt. So so I just wanted to, throw this form of chains of relations, and to ask what are the chains that we can shift, produce as artists within these obviously vertical, obviously hierarchical, obviously sucking, obviously parasitic things.
Only men in their
Madhu, I didn't make
I know
photo.
your AI photo.
So I'm saying we are already doing better, right? I mean, clearly, right? And that brings me to some very quick. Tell me how much time I should have, like 10 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. It's going to be, again, a bit difficult, but I'll pick and choose a few examples, right? So that it's not about technology, it's about this chain of relations, right? It's about who can push, pull, at what, with which, how many friends, under what circumstances, and so on, right? And how actually does this redistribution ideal or the ideal of horizontality and so on work? And some infrastructure, big and small, mostly small, to do with supply chains means this idea of how do we sustain something, right? The business model calls it the supply chain and the lowering of the risk of that. But how do you actually do that? What we call privilege escalation, which just means that even in this room, we are in the top 1% of this society. So let's not, work by assuming that our privilege is lower than it actually is, right? And there might be a way to use, it's a hacker terminology, but to escalate and then redistribute it from an escalated situation rather than a lowest common denominator type of thing. Our living traditions, or a joke about how we grew up and how we live and what things actually we want to work with. And finally, I think there was a, which hasn't shown up here, maybe if I refresh my, no house, like in Bombay, there is no given physical base for a lot of these activities. Camps, whole ethical principle was that it's temporary, the locations are not guaranteed by the the owning of property or land or of barn or any such physical structure, and therefore also the virtuality of many of these things. Let's see very quickly a list of things. I will share maybe 2 or 3. Yeah? So this, as Sanjay described, was our first multi-million-dollar startup, which was not designed to. But a very kind of. So the story is that UltraRed, a sound collective based out of South Africa, Robert Sember left us, camp, and the curator, a pile of 20 pages of notes on the Edgware Road, which is a place that we were both invited to as artists, which set us off on. So it was a really beautiful way of, let's say, non-equal transaction. Like he just left those notes and left, right? So it's not like we are all sitting together, there's cohabitation, but there was a very beautiful, radiant gesture by someone who leaves a set of very detailed notes about their exploration. And so as part of a large, sort of larger project called the Center for Possible Studies in London, which is dealing with migrant, sex worker, all kinds of communities in and around the Edgware Road, which is already an Arab street, now Somali, all of this. We built something called Print, which is now on Print with Camp, but originally was on edgwareroad.org, which basically tried to say that these kinds of transactions that don't happen in real time, that are left behind, that are not possible to meet everyone at the same time, can be part of a different kind of structure, different kind of cloud, where things go up and then they land on the street again. So a very quick example would be like table mats. And this is already in 2017, right? 2007. So all this very old technology, right? Nothing, I'm not saying anything very. So that, this is just an example, but that some image of a cassette, of an Egyptian film that was being shown on the street in the 1980s then lands into this piece of paper like on the street. And that's just one example of many other this kind of ephemeral products that then were assembled on this sort of website, right? Very casually, and just this gesture of I just want to show you the gesture, which is that you drag an image, like from a study. There are like dozens and dozens of studies that were conducted on the street. So, for example, from cinema, I just drag this thing, and this goes onto the street, right, in the form of a leaflet or whatever, right? So this sort of dragging of an object from a virtual kind of database onto something that then very soon lands up onto the street was for one example of the kind of verticality or right, the relation with something else that I'm talking about, which is not present, which is not horizontally there at the same time, et cetera, which is now sort of banal, right? But I just want to remind everybody that there is this kind of non-synchronous possibility and let's say a certain hierarchy of that as well. Bombay Wiki with Camp is just a vast dump of everything we keep on Bombay, which we put on a wiki. I don't want to get into that right now. Ghar with Camp is a very specific way of deploying a much larger set of databases or whatever you want to call them, collections that we maintain or have run since 2007, 2008. One is called Padma, which is a footage archive, now several thousand hours of heavily annotated footage material from all kinds of social movements, all kinds of contexts, mostly in Bombay City. And IndianCine.ma, which is a sort of, let's say, semi-pirate encyclopedia of Indian film, which in the sense that it's now has about 63,000 films. 25,000 of them are in a cupboard in our studio, which I showed with the experimenter team, which is where this sort of story began, right? 63,319 entries, 24,000 actual encyclopedia entries, which is the basis for this thing. This is entirely, it's used by a lot of film schools and enthusiasts and so on. But the example there was that in Gharvit Camp, this is a story about housing in the city of Mumbai from 1950 to 2020, and it's a sort of a movie, like a 105-minute into 3 long kind of serial about the story of housing, and it pulls from both Padma and Indian cinema in very specific ways, and I'll just show you the homemade backend for it. So basically, it's a homemade sort of editing platform made mostly by Jan Gerber, where you see these links to Padma, right? And Indian cinema, these are films. So that's a period where the real estate, Jane Bhi Do Yaro, was being treated as a comedy situation in Bombay. So, just saying that these are sort of these tools, very dense ways of recombining material from IndianCine.ma, Pad.ma, and Bombay Wiki in new narratives, right? And so on. So I don't know if I have too much time, but all the software that builds some of this stuff is freely available on CodeWithCamp, most of it. And some of our interests sort of land in physical spaces. This one is in Mankhurd, in a colony of displaced people after the cyclone. but also I want to show you this picture, which is a rendering by so digital kind of, by a 14-year-old friend of ours who imagined what the cyclone would have done if it had been worse, right? And another one, he made many of these. So it's kind of a imagination of which almost happened of RNR as an isolation center, but then didn't because they found a better one. But this imaginary of how a space could be is very highly rendered, let's say, in what in trade terms is called a digital copy of an actual infrastructure, right? So you can play with the digital copy and try to imagine its sort of futures and so on. So we run that space with others since 2014, and I'll just mention these two things. They are artist infrastructures. Phantasma was a streaming website which draws from the experience of Padma in Indian cinema, but also created the possibility of almost, I think this is 55, 58 texts about the films that were in this program, right? So you have this kind of strange idea of how you could have clips, and then how those clips could be written about in these kind of quite remarkable, actually, amount of sheer amount of writing about a video art program, which I haven't really encountered before. And to end this section, maybe just to say, these are last year's projects. NJPMA is again a semi-authorized collection of everything that Namjoon Paik, the video artist, did. We won a kind of award in his name, and we used the opportunity to propose an artist's vision of what it might be if a well-known artist's oeuvre was, and sort of the raw materials were entirely available, right? So all these things have this kind of, let's say, this infrastructural dimension, which is, let's say, I mean, in this case, which is digital, right? But there are sort of other ways of thinking about this. And let's say our experience is that not 50 people, but 3 people can replace in terms of, let's say, resources, could replace the National Film Archive of India, right? Digital gave you a weird, scalar shift that we still have to negotiate with, have to not let the larger institutions or the larger, Googles, and they've tried, I mean, Google. And to keep it open for others. All this is radically open in that sense. We can talk about how communities are formed, but it's to do with what used to be called, let's say, getting organized, and a dimension of how to live that's not so much visible on the surface, but if you're sensitive to it, this is everywhere, right? This opening of these infrastructures that are continuously surround us. And the final thought was the politics of this is more or less to play or be played, right? To archive or be archived was our original quote. That's it. If you have time for one final provocation, I will show you a live stream from our studio, maybe. And then if I, this is a project on, so let me see, sorry. That's our roof. And let me call, no. No. It's part of a sort of project opening in Berlin next week called Memorious. It's about an infinite memory device, which is traumatic and also challenging. But last thing is that, let me show you something nicer, like Juhu Beach. You know, very, very nice, like. Huh? No, it's like. Kejo wide, Kejo तो नहीं दिखना है. Kejo. No, so there are 4,000 such cameras, right? I mean, we have control of one. So that's Juhu Beach is completely empty. It's crazy. Okay, so Juhu Beach is a long way away from us even there, right? But and the last example of a place might be, and this is sort of what the work is about, might be that now I have too many tabs, but might be that suppose you go to something like give me 1 second. Okay. Okay, let's go to what could be like a police room.
So right now you are controlling that camera that you have.
This is live. So you can imagine a world where we see vertical police seeing 3,000 cameras, we are seeing 2,000 cameras. Right? I mean, you can imagine a different kind of relation with visibility. It's just a provocation, we can talk about more. But this is live, yes. This is current, like 5 seconds ago or so. Right? But I wanted to show you what happens if this is in 5 years ago. Right? Same building. And so on. So I'll stop there, but these type of play in this kind of zone is, I think, something that is to be brought back in the absence of the land, state support, for things that are entirely supportless, let's say. This is the beginning maybe of a kind of a way to think about how to support without the traditional forms of support being alive. It produces new kinds of dependence and new kinds of trust issues, and the fact that I am dependent on like somebody in, like I'm dependent on Z in camp for certain things, but it's skill based, right? And I'm depending on the whole thing of Indian Cine.ma depends on 3 people, one of whom is in Berlin. So it creates new kinds of, let's say, hierarchy. But those hierarchies are not necessarily the bad ones or the institutional ones or the patriarchal ones or any of those things. They are new kinds, and we have to be able to speak about those and work with them and so on and so on. So thank you very much. And questions? Yeah. Insert title. Sorry.
This also,
Click to. I didn't say any of my notes, but okay. No, I'm freelance.
This was great, and some of the members in the audience probably also remember Shaina's presence with us here. So, yeah, there's so much accrual, and of course some resonances from what she shared, but also particularly kind of struck by the approach of your of your address to us today. Kind of just going back to that image that you used to kind of strike up this sort of absurd, humorous, but also uncanny image of what the Curators Hub could look like as a kind of AI collaboration. With the fact of these new programs like DALI, etc., that sort of are sucking up attention, are getting younger artists to be not just curious, but also perhaps sometimes insecure about what it might mean to work with these kinds of features, and the kind of, even the sort of visual aesthetics is something that's challenged enormously, right, by these kinds of AI languages. So I wonder what you make of that also, and how we might think about that, not only, yeah, for sort of from different generational perspectives in a sense, because you talked about it connecting to the past, but maybe not capturing the future. I thought that was something to stay with. But we are thinking about practitioners who are moving into the future rapidly. So, yeah.
I'm just trying to pull up the reference that we. Give me 1 second. Yeah. Okay, this is at least sort of classic. And no, that was an illustration of the. So what I didn't say that is that there is, for example, in that case, that is an open source tool. It's based on 5.75 billion images, captions, which are mostly drawn from social media, right? So that's the thing, that pyramid scheme is always there, even if you don't see it, right? So this image is drawing from, let's say, 5.75 billion images of all our interactions, and maybe Kolkata is poorly represented, but the image of the flooded experimenter in Bombay was quite fun as well, and so on. And you could easily generate 2,000 of these in the time that we've, been here together today. So it changes the relationship with image production, with design, with a lot of things in a pretty fundamental way. But of course, the critique is obvious that none of this generates, or right, this is not designed, like it's optimized for scale, right? It's not designed to produce community. It's like human communities around it as such. It sucks, like if you search for specific people, like I can show you some examples of my friend Sneha, for example, who's a well-known person, so her face shows up if you search for her name, right, in a particular context, and it's completely cringe in the way in which it does, and so on. So I think that it produces a whole set of weird, backward-looking pictures, right? That was my point about it. Whereas the whole point was to be able to do something really new, right, and not just sort of granularly remix endlessly, and put television stuff into Netflix, and so that's the kind of one-line maybe position. But then, of course, lots of people use it to trigger their imaginations, right? Which is not linear and which is not backwards looking only. So it's complex, and the field is rapidly expanding. So, and some AI won a painting contest and Curator, so there are all these kind of things that are happening as we speak. And so a kind of critique of it or kind of deep dive into it is also things that artists will have to do in the next kind of years. But I'm just saying that all these things are part of the intricate sort of effects that technology has and its weird scalar properties, right? So it's quite unfamiliar, like it's not so easily grasped, like intuitively necessarily, let's say. So we have to somehow train ourselves to also see this dimension, right? I'm also all for eating normal food, but I also want to taste like this other dimension or be able to.
Yeah. Could you maybe talk a little bit more about this, the labor behind sort of making this knowledge available online? I sort of feel like while the immensity of Padma and Sini.ma, etc., like just the scale of it, the kind of people using it, as you mentioned, scholars, students, activists. But yeah, I think it would be really important to think through the labor and what that question of labor means now as well, after sort of the height of pandemic. What has it meant?
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of different kinds of labor. So one of the, I think one of the ways in which we've approached it is that, for example, in the case of cinema archive, a lot of things you get for free. For free meaning that when you look at a film print or when you go online and you find a copy of it somewhere, sometimes there is the subtitle file that someone has done the labor for, right? Someone unknown to us. Again, that's this kind of relay, passing the ball into the dark kind of. Where then that means you get the subtitle files for free, but that means that in a database format, for example, you can search for every word spoken in a decade of Bengali cinema or something like that, right? You can really refine so the labor part of it was done at some point by someone, and our debt to that labor is to not extract the value out of it, right? But to pass it on in hopefully a more organized form, right? Or in a more accessible form, let's say. So that's our labor. But the labor of the transcription of the, like say the subtitling of Bengali films, which is done extensively in Jadavpur, actually as a part of a project we co-funded, or elsewhere on the internet by somebody completely anonymous, that labor has happened in the past, right? So there is a chain of labor that we are part of, but our role in that is not to sort of extract the profit of it, but to really pass it on. I mean, to parasite and to be parasited in turn is the model. But of course, there's a lot of labor still in organizing, building, but it's done by relatively skilled people who use transcription tool. Now a lot of automated transcription and things like that, affect the way we work. But it's really been a longer trajectory. I mean, most of the people who've worked on Padma have been doing it for 13 years now. The 3 or 4 people who work on it, so they're still around, we're still around, So it's just waiting for the next sort of evolution. And there are other sister projects, as like Egyptian Revolution Video Archive and others, right, which are part of the Pandora family, like the software was used in other places, and so on. So it's a weird and persistent website, basically, that refuses to go away in a way, right?
Just to shift to another topic. I wonder, and this could be just my sort of lack of knowledge, that I've been sort of reading from from people like Ruha Benjamin and others who've been writing. Ruha Benjamin wrote this incredible book called Race Against Technology, and sort of just reflecting on the racist bias within bots, within AI, within hiring
Absolutely,
algorithms.
yeah.
And I would love to hear also if there's enough credible writing of such kind coming from the subcontinent, because obviously there's also been recent issues in Google and Apple, etc., that sort of highlight race and caste.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd love to hear your position. What are you thinking and reading in that regard from here?
I mean, with Padma, our position was that a lot of these, let's say the discussion around what can be made public is an important one, right? I mean, we've had all variants of that discussion in the last decade. But also we were standing a little bit on the side that we want to see the problem. Like if filmmaking was a brutal, exploitative exercise, and if raw footage showed us that, then we want to see it. Like the image, like we would like to see that the film is beautiful in the process as well as a product, right? And the Footage Archive made that proposal. That's what we should be able to see. Like, what does it mean if 40 people are wandering around with cranes and pushing their cameras into subjects and so on, which is a very common way of making cinema. So this whole sort of inside-out cinema, and that applies. I think I'm not, in any sense an expert on every technology, which is so I don't want to say things that I know not enough about. But as you know, the bias has been present in all kinds of ways, right? On all kinds of image practices and photography as well as AI, right? So there is a lot of, in our own reckoning, there is a lot of, cases where we are able to see it because Padma exists, right? If that image is not produced or is never seen, the image of violence, then we can't talk about it. And that's been our sort of position, right? Now, when machines start doing the annotation or the collection or the editing, right, they are completely stupid in many ways, right? So they have no way of, AI, as I was trying to, is quite a limited kind of intelligence, and extremely powerful in some abstract ways. So, as you know, like there's a lot of people writing about race in AI ethics. There's people at IIT Bombay, for example, who are AI socialists, and there are all kinds of but I don't know more about that. It's more like it's a whole explosion of AI stuff, which also I'm backing away from a little bit. I just use that example to show you the top of the pyramid right now. Right? But I don't subscribe to that as an artistic practice necessarily. Sorry, two long answers maybe.
No, it's fine. We're also going to take questions, so please, please join in. There's one there. Yeah.
So I actually wanted to ask you a question about one of the works that you all have made called From Gulf to Gulf to Gulf.
Yeah.
So a lot of, even in your bio, it talks about energy and surveillance, and a lot of the videos just say actual footage of what I'm hoping is kind of trying to reflect the political tensions of trade routes and things like that.
Yeah.
Even with the videos that you have of the CCTV with, say, looking at a panorama vision of Bombay, a lot of the work is kind of like a Big Brother gone good, because you're allowing, the audience to access this kind of footage. So with the work that you'll make, when audiences view these things, do you just want to archive a moment in time that is very similar to all your work, everything is kind of in the space? Or do you hope that when viewers come in, it kind of opens up this everyday on a ship experience for everybody. Like, I just want you to elaborate on that. Because I don't know if everybody in the audience has seen that work, but it's like one of my favorite video works that I've looked at.
Thank you. I didn't get, could you repeat this, the question part?
Can you like elaborate, like when you're creating things like this, or when you're collaborating, say, with like the sailors, like how do you explain it to them? Why do you want to see that every day to an audience that is so far removed from, like
No, so
their life?
so that's so the reference is to a film project that sort of was made in 2012 or so, and then it was part of a, and is in a way part of an ongoing interest in specifically the Western Indian coast, but also the other, the relation with Somalia specifically. So the short answer is that in that film and in many other places, the traditional ethnographic subject, let's say, is sort of behind the camera, like, I mean, in the kind of straight version, like that the person, like even in the Jerusalem film, like the people who are normally on camera saying, this is us and this is our story, are sort of not there because they are behind it, right? So, and they are doing all kinds of things, like it's going up, it's going down, it's going into the sea, it's going into dolphins, it's coming out. And that's a sort of photographic video, like existing practice that existed before us, and it will continue, and it continues without us. We entered it with our own sort of set of video practice, like specifically Shaina's, who's more like coming from film and the critique of ethnographic documentary, where she would always film with this, even like 20 years ago would be filming with the viewfinder, like, you know, flipped and all kinds of things. And in a way, a lot of the CCTV work is coming from her ethical or political conflicts around cinema, right, or film, like as a basic question. What is a camera? Why is it up there? Who can use it? You know, simple, like basic questions, which are also in a way legal questions, or like, I don't know if you're sliding into Karunanandi, but there's simple, like who is supposed to be able to control all these new technologies, right? And what does it mean? So in that sense, for Gulf to Gulf at least, it was a combination of these engagements around modes of filming and musicking, like adding music live on your phone to the clip you just shot and things like that. But you should see it. It's also on IndianCine.now. And I mean, it's a longer discussion about where that came from and Indian Ocean stuff. But, yeah.
Any other questions? Someone needs to pass the mic at the back.
Thanks for that. A lot of it is like way above my head, but it was super enlightening. And it also reminded me of this article that I saw that the writer co-wrote with an AI about her sister's passing. Essentially, the writer couldn't come to terms with grief, and they co-write it, but the AI was not able to deliver the kind of like complexity of grief that humans can experience. So I think when you said that it's kind of like backward looking, some of the things that it generates, I think it kind of put words to like what a lot of people are trying to figure out. So thanks for that. I had a question about when you said archive or be archived. Do you mean that in a way we are constantly kind of being documented all the time by a, you know, just all like cameras, silent technology?
Yeah, every device, everything, every interaction, electronic interaction.
Yeah. And then is this also your work a way to kind of bring our awareness to, like you said, existing in this different dimension, and also maybe exercising some agency there, where I don't believe that most of us know how to, or that the fact that we are, like, this is happening. It's almost kind of like a silent, it's not even a submission, it's kind of like a sync that's just happened. So is that one of the, because that's what came to mind for me. I was like, okay, this is happening in my life. to my body right now. So is
Yeah.
it something that I should be aware of and learn how to participate in? I mean, I was just wondering if that was something that you think
No,
about.
yeah, I mean, partly yes, that lots of technologies lead to their own forms of surveillance, right? I mean, when you use a phone, it creates a network that can be traced, right? When you use the internet, so there's surveillance like baked into many of these things, but partly by design, right? So just first the awareness of that, right? Because it's not something that's banal these days. I mean, we know from the first thing the state does is to take, is to sort of, as we know in every case that's happened recently, the first thing they do is take your phone away, they take your laptop away. And this is in some weird like jurisprudence area which is not really worked out, like what is private, why are my WhatsApp chats on, or whichever chats on the news feed tomorrow, like if I'm a well-known person or things like that. So why is your phone being taken away the minute you get, a complaint against you by someone is a question, is a kind of a legal question. But the sort of cultural side of that is it produces or should produce a response, or we should be aware of the conditions in which we are floating, right? It's like a media question, and we should be brave and playful to the extent that is possible within those conditions in order to imagine a future where those conditions can be improved, or in order to imagine alternative futures, right? We cannot always produce them, but we can imagine, we can provoke, we can ask questions which are somehow futuristic looking, like the CCTV camera that zooms into Juhu Beach, but actually is not futuristic at all because it's happening multiplied by 5,000 in Bombay, not in New York or wherever, right? And it's happening in Calcutta, and it's happening in this room, and it's happening in in the hotel you're in, and so on and so on. So it's just this switch in sensibility, I guess, to account for that as well, right? And how do you not fight it, but how do you be imaginative, and how do you live under such conditions and continue to exert some form of always collective power, invention, creativity, all those things that artists are supposed to do.
We're out of time, but
Last question.
Yeah, last to go.
Thank you. It's more of a comment, I suppose, and yeah, the AI stuff kind of goes over my head as well. I'm not sure if anyone else is struggling with this, but I just think that
I don't want to promote it as a form of working.
No,
we have to work with it soon.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that, when there's more equality in the world, there's more access to things, and just coming from an Indigenous perspective, I mean, documentation through AI, through any form of technology is very powerful, especially if there's police violence.
Yes.
Especially if you need some kind of documentation in remote countries or, remote parts of the world. It's very, very important. And it's quick access to the internet where we can share this evidence. And so I think there's a lot of evidence-based stuff around it. There's also a lot of communities in Australia, in the Yolngu lands, in the top end, that use kind of technology as a way to map land. As a kind of a way to map land and to also create your own future. So I think that there are other kind of really positive elements to kind of like just use this free technology or use this free access. I mean, free, depending on how you, calculate that. But I also think that there's a lot of power in that to people who don't, who can't generally have power in particular, well, most societies actually.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. But as we, like in Egypt, for example, the Twitter revolutions and so on, we found some of the limits to that power. It's an ongoing, right? I mean, it's not also a static situation, depending on what tools you're using, those tools can be spying on you and so on, right? So it's a continuous, let's say, struggle. I was presenting more like a capacity building or some sort of like, organ extending, just to be sensitive to this, the mediation problem, right? It's not only about tools, it's also about just the way that, when we present, like to take your example, a video, of, it's also a representational question, like a video of an event, let's say, the event, and I don't mean this in any negative sense, like, just the presentations of videos taken by people of, say, indigenous communities, then turned into some sort of presentations, then that are shown somewhere else, and so there is already a chain of mediation. Who has the ability to speak for whom, and all those questions, right? So Padma's sort of question was based on this, like the footage allows you to see that relation and to, if needed, acknowledge the power relation and work with that. So just to grow some new senses around it is for me, and then to have something above and below the social, like, which is the kind of social that people talk about and the gathering, but something above it that maybe can survive or provoke or hold, that's not only bodily. Sorry, yes.
I think we're really out of time. Unfortunately, we have our guest speaker waiting to join us after the break, but would be great to
Comment. I'll shut up.
No response.
No response.
Okay, is it a comment?
Make it a comment.
Mike.
Yeah.
1 second, please. Mike. Josh.
I'll try and be brief. It was very interesting, actually, to listen to both the presentations side by side today, because they were so both responding in certain ways to what's happening in the world. And so I think as contemporary practices, they're both very important. The first one, for me, actually resonated with hospitality and what is happening in the world in terms subliminally addressing all the issues, whether it's climate change or migration or whatever, in this kind of invitation that they had into their practice of extending that hospitality to be sustainable, to be, to share resources, to invite people into your home. And out of that, making art production. Your response and Cam's response to what is happening and what you're drawing attention to is that while that is very obvious, we're all aware of what's happening, but there are also very dangerous forces happening because they are below the surface, you're not responding. And I know your practice, so I know how you'll have retrieved image. But when I just want to quickly make a point about the image that you were talking about and what Natasha asked you about labor, is that there is a lot of labor in what is coming out as, say, you pull out this image as the first image that comes when you type in a word. There's labor going into coding algorithms that will pull out this image in that certain search word. There is labor in blocking certain images.
Absolutely.
And that therefore there's this control about the visual media, which we are now realizing, but haven't. It's the way this visual media is being used and the power of art and the power of that visual media that's being used by, as we know, governments across the world. So I think the practice that, when you're talking about surveillance, we are not sure. It's very difficult, the area of how to use that in art. And while Rangrupa is coming, kind of opening up this shared kind of way of making art, you're starting actually from a shared thing which is already somebody's put out on the net. But then you're trying to make sense of that. And how, this thing. So they're both responses to very contemporary things happening in the world, and therefore it was actually wonderful to listen to both the practices side by side.
More comments. I want participants are allowed. Thank you for that. I'll save it for later.
And again, just comments, and we can talk about this later. I think it's important how, since you've mentioned it twice, that how indigenous communities themselves are using technology and using their own images and circulating them in internet and then connecting with each other, which is also like example of like I resonate with Baruch, like queer communities and also protecting their identities where it's very risky. So I think very much acknowledging your aspect and maybe you're more describing about the Padma project, but also it's a bit colonial and hierarchical statement itself to demean indigenous community as incapable of technological intervention, and also assuming a lot of things that how the consent works and what is the things behind the and relationship and kinship behind before it comes to the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, but I didn't mean it as a critique.
It's a comment.
Yeah. I meant we should see and discuss those exact things.
Okay, we're gonna have a small break, a very short break, like 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
10 minutes.
Quick tea break.
Yeah.
We have
And then we have Karuna Nandi joining us. It's going to be a conversation. Concluding session for day one. And, okay, a few more people coming through. Are we complete? Yeah, I think so. Okay. As part of our commitment to invite guest speakers to the Curators Hub, bringing in and recognizing the forms of knowledge that in many ways enable our work, enable us also a certain, apprehensively so using the word cultural freedom within our current climate. Karuna Nandi is one such leading figure whose work, by being in conversation, we also wish to acknowledge, to recognize and give gratitude for. She is an advocate at the Supreme Court of India, an international human rights lawyer whose valued sense of public engagement, ethics, and expert counsel is extremely vital to not only our political realities, but our cultural realities that are webbed and connected. And so in the kinds of cases that she has argued for, that she has won after immense effort, after many years at times, through the work of other colleagues working alongside her, this is the enduring work that we wish to recognize today. Her pro bono practice includes the Supreme Court litigation from the 1984 gas disaster and toxic waste dumps in Bhopal. She has also argued cases involving the rights of independent media, alleged terrorists, mentally ill people, and class actions on sexual harassment. Karuna's advisory and policy work includes various contributions, at times with various government bodies, including in Nepal, Pakistan, and Bhutan. Also working in prestigious and international forums, working on freedom of expression, working on the Anti-Rape Laws and Rights to Food Act. She has been interviewed and commented on free speech, gender, and legal issues in various media, and has also been acknowledged as the Time 100 Most Influential Voices of 2022. Welcome, Karuna.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome, Natasha. I am delighted to be in conversation with you and with with artists and with because as we were speaking of this earlier, and I've represented different kinds of artists depending on how you define art, I suppose, and I also have a lot of close friends who are artists. And I think that this working in silos is an artificial creation of intellectualism in, it's much more of a trend in this century. And I'm so glad that in our own small ways, we're changing that now. So the way that Natasha and I and Priyanka and Pratika designed this is to be something that is very much in conversation with all of you. So no thought, no question is too trivial, and we hope to explore the synergies and have fun.
Thank you. To start with, and we've been speaking today as well about the kinds of modes, as you said, yes, there's the artificial silos that sort of apparently separate us, but the minute one runs into a legal problem, then suddenly that artificial separation is no more. And so this conversation, in a sense, is also perhaps a way of bringing us closer into, Karuna, what we were thinking of as sort of the performance of speech making and speech acts, given that artistic intelligence is so concerned with in a sense, imagining new modes of language, thinking about emancipatory forms and frameworks of language, but also building entries of testimony that may not be permissible in a courtroom. These are some of the different kinds of things that are also being addressed today by practitioners who also come from very diverse backgrounds and whose histories have been systemically erased and neglected. So how may we sort of bring together sort of this somewhat daunting framework of legal speech with sort of a sense of the speculative and imaginative in artistic modes of speech production?
I think there's two different flows, there's two different ways to look at it, right? Like one is how to bring the legal into the art, because a lot of the suppression that we see today of speech, of art, is through the law. So it's not that, it's not like the first emergency, right? It's of 1976. It's not that there's an official suspension of fundamental rights. It's that it's much worse, because at least when fundamental rights were restored, there was a whole bunch of case law that was restored. It was, it just all came back, right? Whereas now what's happening, it was also much more violent. And I'm not saying that Indira Gandhi's emergency was all better than now. But what I'm saying is that there's a way in which, legally speaking, what's happening now is a lot more damaging, because there are changes that are happening to the law that are going to last into new governments, and they're going to last for a long time. There are judicial appointments that are happening that are motivated by government. There are massive changes in how policing happens and how the kind of impunity that we see over certain speech acts and the protection of other speech acts, for example, right? And we're also seeing the change in actual law. So the Indian Penal Code and the Criminal Procedure Code is going to be overhauled quite soon, and it's going to be laid before Parliament. And before you know it, we're going to have laws that are even more draconian than we have now. And the reason that we have laws in the criminal laws draconian now is because much of it is interested because they want a democratic government. They weren't interested in hearing from the polity and then being reconstituted as those as governors, or as those who govern, as a government rather, right? So that governance was easier for them, right? Now, not only has that, I think, contributed to a culture that we already have, we don't have a very strong free speech culture in this country. I think one of the benefits of it being suppressed is that it's burgeoning a little bit. So, my friend Uzma did, acquaintance, made a sort of piece of art, a multimedia piece, where she interviewed me about, free speech actually. And then she used those words in her installation. So I think there are flows to be had both ways. The work that you were talking about, the artist that you represent, a sonic scape and of a person that a person in jail experiences. I think that's very interesting. For example, I would love to be able to use, when arguing, for example, against solitary confinement, I would love to be able to bring that kind of visceral experience into a courtroom. We're far away from that, let's be clear, you know? Our courtrooms are fairly conservative, but we're always, my attempt always in court is to bring the experience closer home, for it not to be overly abstract and polysyllabic, but for the court to really attempt to put themselves in the shoes of the litigant, right? Whether it's, so we have the big marital rape appeal coming up in February. We have the Bhopal curative petition coming up in January. And these are huge challenges because these are people who are very, very different from our judges. Our judges are, in the Supreme Court, are, you know, in their mid-60s. They're almost exclusively, I mean, there's a big effort to increase representation under this present Chief Justice and the new Chief Justice, and also actually Justice Ramana. And there are more women, but there are very, very few women, right? There are, I mean, it's mostly upper caste, able-bodied, cishet, you name it, privileged Hindu men. Now, these people, therefore, are very different from a lot of the litigants that come before them. I'm not saying that representation, like, you know, we've seen with Suella Braverman in particular, as well as Rishi Sunak, that a representation isn't always the answer, you know? But I think representation is definitely part of the answer.
Yeah, I'd like to come to that particular speech when talking about, you know, women in court and their advocacy work. In your speech for Time 100, when receiving this acknowledgement, you mentioned patriarchy is coming back like a cancer and metastasizing in court judgments. And so this sort of way in which you are part of, unfortunately, a smaller legacy, a fraction, but of women representatives who have been shaping the legal paradigm of our country, and also the kind of colonial burdens of that legal paradigm. And I also was listening to an interview that you did with Fali Nariman, where you bring up the representation of women in the bench and at the highest levels. And he had something very different to say. And you were advocating for something that was also like a structural readjustment, really, while being someone who also works actively on gender justice. So I'd love to kind of hear a bit more about that, you know, your source of inspiration and your struggles with the system in that sense.
That's a bunch of big questions. You know, I think being a lawyer is hard and being an artist is hard, right? Being a woman is often hard. Now, when we are engaging in being people who are attempting to do work with particular labels and boxes thrust upon us, the challenge is manifold. How we relate to the particularities of the patriarchies, the heteropatriarchies that we inhabit, is quite contextual. When I started, and I think we all navigate them in different ways. And I think this is why when people say to me that, oh, the hijab should be banned, or that or speak of other bans, or say, or take a very hardline position, for example, against Karwa Chauth, I think it's fundamental to understand that the range of options available to the range of options available to not just women, but women, queer people, Dalit folk, disabled people, the range of options available are more limited, And by banning something, you're taking away another option in a society that doesn't have either the will or the ability to expand that range. So, more concretely, when I entered the law, I think, looking to acquire healthy power, right? And relate to the and play with the patriarchal structures in those ways, and with a sense of integrity intact, right? But what that meant, I think, as a result, was that to some extent I was playing by the rules of the old boys, actually. And at some point, I just thought, I think it came to a point where I felt enough's enough. And I just started to be myself, Also a lot more in court. So I would smile, I would make jokes, I would, more so, right? Like rather than trying to be serious all the time and trying to, be all. And I find that it serves me a lot better, but it's also polarizing. So there are people who, so there's, so I get a lot of love, and I'm so grateful for it, because that's a big part of what keeps you going, right? But I also get my own fair share of I mean, I don't want to say hate, because it's horrible to think of yourself in the world like that, but I also get hate, I've blocked most of my haters on Twitter, and I'm very happy to say. And anyway, content moderation is terrible on Twitter in India, so I don't think we're going to see a change with Elon Musk's takeover. But I think that making space, once we, show up as ourselves, the more we show up as ourselves, and the more we do the work as ourselves, even if we don't, and I think, no, I'm going to edit that, and creating space, not just for ourselves, right, but space for others, which also actually now in our generation, there's a much greater realization that if there are, two women on a panel or three women on a panel, it's much more likely that the conversation will go in a particular way, rather than just that one token woman, and that it's only, as Ruth Bader Ginsburg says, that she wanted to wait until there were 9 women on the Supreme Court, as in 100% female Supreme Court. So, I think occupying space is deeply significant. Listening to ourselves and honoring the identities that we have and claim, and honoring the identities of others that aren't the sort of little sliver that usually gets honored, is, lets us all breathe out a little bit. There's a sigh of relief. There's a space that gets created. And what else is life about?
On the note of Rishi Sunak, I kind of just have to bring that up now that I'm back. It was like horrible to sort of like taking that news from Berlin and, sense the accolades without criticality. I understand, what you say as well about representation in a certain sense and what that means in these offices. But the paradoxical toxicity of conservative plutocrats coming to power in the UK and elsewhere in through the diaspora that holds a certain amount of affluence and sort of works for the affluent in those contexts, importantly. And advocating even for the most threatening architectures for asylum seekers, for those who have not had the privilege of easy entry, but also not of sustenance within these cities that are unaffordable. To then celebrate them simplistically for their ethnicity is something that we inherently, it feels we need to really question that fundamentally. So, and you've sort of come out with your opinion on that, and yet I just sort of wonder again, in a social sense, but then also in a legal sense, what does it mean when a head of state is sort of speaking in these ways and then sort of holds a certain identity? What are the troubling aspects of that we might see coming forward?
So one of the big things of our time is the polarization of polities all over the world, right? There's the rise of sovereignty, there's the reduction of international solidarity, and there is huge polarization within communities, within countries. I think a significant part of that is because of the way platforms have been working, and there are two things that go viral: inspiration and hate. Now, both are partisan, right? Both suffer from a strong confirmation bias. And so all over the world, we have people who now have very strong feelings, and everyone has an opinion. Fact is at a premium because it's now become more and more difficult to be a journalist who gets paid with a structure of editors that get paid. I mean, with The Wire, for example, right? The Wire has some of the best editors in the world, but they're hugely underfunded. And if you want to do tech stories well, like, you need to be properly funded, and you need to have proper tech editors, and you need to have particular structures in place, right? And I mean, I just want to say, because I think there's an unnecessary debate there, that they have done some of the most important and hard-hitting investigative stories that we have had so far. So when I see a sort of holier-than-thou attitude when people are, when people say that, they had it coming to them, and that was sloppy journalism, frankly, do the work they did and then let's talk, right? Instead of sitting various stories out. And, but that's in its own place. So in this fairly polarized world, right? And I think that's something that has to be addressed fundamentally, like when we look at democracy. And it's not. But in this polarized world, when we have somebody who is a person of color at one end, and if that end is an end that stands against climate change, think of how bizarre that is. And how important that is, because it's very much against countries like India. We have a massive coastline. We are already suffering. We will suffer with deaths. We will suffer with droughts. We will suffer with the kinds of damage that Sunak has no interest in addressing. He kicked out of his cabinet the climate secretary, right? And of course, the asylum seekers and others. I think sort of what brings all of this into much sharper relief is actually Suella Braverman, or as my sister-in-law calls her, Suella de Vil. I didn't say that. And, I think if Suella Braverman says something, she's much more likely to get away with it than a white male politician, right? and to perpetuate and further the kind of racist, anti-asylum, xenophobic policy. It's very useful to have something like that, somebody like that, right? At the same time, and we were talking about this earlier, I think that because of the polarization in the world, we have a significantly reduced capacity to hold paradox. And so this side taking needs to stop. Because frequently the world isn't entirely consistent, And Rishi Sunak and even, Suella Braverman will make it easier, I think, for a progressive person of color to become prime minister. So it's all contextual, it's all trade-offs, sometimes more than others. Life is imperfect, life is complicated, and unpacking these issues is, and reaching understandings, I think is, and while we're doing that, I think it's much more important than taking sides. And I think I've blocked all my horrible trolls, but I'm going to make more of an effort now after I spoke to follow more credible, follow more right-wing handles that aren't trolls. But I want to address, I didn't properly address the question that you had asked earlier, Natasha. Inspiration, art, joy, these are very important acts of resistance. These are very fundamental acts of living. And when it's hard, if you have a court case that's taking years, one of the hardest court cases in the world, right? Like challenging the biggest corporate governmental nexus in the United States, for example, the Obama government and his Assistant Secretary of State wrote a letter to Montague Singh Ahluwalia here when the Planning Commission was looking for a loan from the World Bank and said, can you get rid of this Dow problem, right? And these are the so-called good guys. So the BJP, of course, the Congress's problems and the corruption with regard to Bhopal is legendary. But even the BJP government, they responded with 8 pages in terms of rejoinder to a reply that was so big. Then you also come across in court and in other places, people saying, oh God, is that still going on? And I wish I was doing something more, So there is all of that. When all of that is against one, then finding the core of how to make that work is important. So I didn't want to just get lost in the papers. So when this round of the litigation began, I went down to Bhopal and spent a couple of days there meeting people again and talking to people and yes, giving speeches in large, fora to survivors, but also having individual conversations and coming back to the core of what I felt was important and who I was serving, and the sort of actual nature of the case. And attempted to bring that in the courtroom because whenever I'm in court, like today I was in court for, I was talking to Pratik and it was kind of funny because I was in court for a company called Narayan Industries that had lost a tender, the West Bengal government, right? But the thing is that what was that case about and what was, even if it's not a big human rights case with a very obvious emotional or rights or, lofty connection, right? Like what he was supplying was ICU machines for children and neonates. And the forgeries then meant that there were going to be worse machines, you know? And here was somebody who was an honest business person and was really upset about this and wanted to do something about this. And so when I walk into court, I always, when I'm a bit stressed or nervous or getting lost in my head, I take a deep breath and tell myself that this is not about me. That I am the channel through which my client and that this kind of, and this version of justice is meant to communicate itself. And that always helps.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think this notion as well of justice is something we've been sort of also holding in the room, right? Because it's not even simply about justice being delayed. It's just it's also justice as a medium. That's something I've been sort of thinking through. Justice itself as a medium that may not also arrive in a material sense within one's lifetime, and that is precisely like when I think about the case of Bhopal. It's something, you know, and many would sort of reflect. Perhaps with me, it's sort of something I feel like I've been hearing since I was an infant, and so you sort of grow up with that sensory notion, no matter how far you are from it, of the scales of that case of justice sort of not even being able to for it not even being able to arrive in a material sense, and sort of it keeps gaining magnitude and perhaps also threading itself with other such sort of cases in which the magnitude is immense. It's in the atmosphere for us all. I am going to open up to questions from our audience.
But you know, in that context, do open it up. But in that context, I wanted to quote Seamus Heaney, because I was once, you know, I've been working at this for a long time, right? It's a huge amount of work. It's obviously entirely pro bono. It's and it doesn't have the kind of success that some of my gender work has had, or some of my free speech work has had, right? Like, for example, you know, when we speak about staying with it and working hard, and because doing what we have control over, right? Fairly frequently, we get that amazing judgment or that amazing legislation, or, you know, those amazing bits of the legislation, right? Like, so for example, when No Fathers in Kashmir came to me, and I was told that they were, you know, that there was a ban, and they wanted a U certificate, like for children, you know, and that was particularly important actually for Indian children in you know, the mainland to be watching a film like that, right, and understanding what's really going on with the disappearances, etc. So it seemed like a bit of a far-fetched idea, and we worked really hard at finding the right case law and the right angle. And I was, you know, I was on personal, and I came out for that, just for that, you know, and we won. We got a US certificate. And so this case, and I'm sort of much more oriented personality-wise towards impact. I find it difficult. I find resistance and persistence much more. I mean, persistence I'm quite good at, but I find resistance difficult without those significant wins. We've had some wins, like, but it took, for example, years of incredibly hard work to even bring safe water to the people drinking the toxic waste, because the government would keep coming back and saying, we've done it. And then we'd have to go back and say, well, actually, in this house, this house, this house, this house, this house, here's a list of, you know, 500 homes that are still drinking water laced with dichlorobenzene and hexachlorocyclohexane, you know? But then we got that in the end. We got a healthcare judgment. And then you have to work harder then to implement it, because there's a huge problem with politics and government. And I was telling one of the activists that, oh God, what's the point? And he said, you know, to keep justice alive, to keep hope alive is fundamental. To do the work so that, as Seamus Heaney once wrote, history says don't hope on this side of the grave, but then once in a lifetime, the longed for tidal wave of justice can rise up, and hope and history rhyme.
Thank you for that. If there are questions, it would be great if you don't mind coming here so Karna can see you.
Or if you're feeling lazy, I'll just hear you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
You mentioned Rishi Sunak. I don't think any liberal person of color can ever come to power in one of these states, in either the USA or it's only because they are conservative. That is why there is some chance of these people coming to power. Don't you think so? A liberal person of color coming to power would be a contradiction, I think. That's one thing. And the other thing is about the legal system. This legal system is built on privilege. Those who come, it's even representatives of, say, Dalits or minorities, when they are judges, somehow they become representatives of the establishment more than, I mean, there are people individually, they may have their values, but the laws are such, the legal system is such, that they actually represent or are tilted in favor of privilege. Don't you think that?
So my answer to your first point is President Obama and Kamala Harris. You know, I will also say, though, that there's a way in which power is more accessible to conservative power is, but no. I think if you look at the rise of Obama and Kamala Harris on the one hand and Sunak on the other, I think it's important to acknowledge that the world is changing a little bit, you know? And how great is that? With regard to the legal system, see, look, what law is supposed to do is to codify relationships between citizens and the state, and between, you know, between how we speak, what is beyond the pale, what is not, what art we can make, what art we absolutely can't make. And it's, in theory, meant to be a social contract that we all make as we live together, and that we give up rights, we give up certain rights so that we can live together with more rights, right? Like, that's the theory of it. That's, you know, Hobbes, Rousseau, Locke, natural rights, that you come into the world. Basically, variations on the theme. This is, in significant part, nonsense. And the reason that this is nonsense is because you inherit the social contract, you know? It's not that, for example, if you look at the law on surrogates, and nobody asked the surrogates, you know? If you look at even the Supreme Court case on hijab, and there were very few, like even on TV debates, right? Like there were very few hijabis. In court, there was just not enough representation of Muslim women of different persuasions, you know? So even when you had progressive judgments in Sabrimala even, right? You had progressive judgments of the same cohort of judges that we were just speaking of, but their idea of what was progressive in the particular situation, right? So, so who makes law? Who gets asked when laws are made? Who determines how that law is interpreted? Whose voices are in the courtroom? That's something that I'm, and many others, are working very hard to change. And it's a very seriously uphill task. Because when Reliance is in the courtroom, I also do, I also do commercial work. When I'm representing, I don't represent Reliance, but when I'm representing a big company, or when Reliance is in the courtroom, the kind of time and space you're given is different, you know? And the Reliance gas case went on for months, frankly. And we are told in the Bhopal cases that no, you're going to have a short time because these are some of the most disadvantaged people in the world, right? So where does that leave us? There are people that say that law codifies power, actually. And I don't have that kind of deeply cynical view of it because I wouldn't be doing it otherwise. I think coming closer to a social contract that's based on justice, that's based on this glorious constitution that is still glorious, it's going to change at some point unless we fight for it not to. But there's a lot to believe in, and there's a lot. We must always, I think, acknowledge progress. We must always hold that dear.
Questions, comments?
We have the lady behind you, the person behind you, Natasha. No, also yeah. There you go.
Hello. Thank you for this conversation. I actually just have a comment. And this is based on the project we were working on, which was looking at discursive justice. And
Sorry, it was looking at what justice?
Discursive justice.
Right.
Yes. And what was incredible to look through was, of course, those cases took forever. And often the judgments, they were not even, maybe they were satisfying after 25 years of fighting. There were some positive judgments. But what myself and my collaborators were actually looking at is, or found interesting, is how used those moments to speak. They used those moments to enter different ways of speech, different ways of dress. They also, I think one of the cases was, I forget, I think it was the British Islands. And what this one chief was actually fighting about land that was being used for, or wanted to be used for commercial possibilities. And he was saying that they have custody of this land. And he was using dress to prove that. He was using artifacts to show their understanding of this particular land and to show the harmony that they were, or the harmony, the way that they had been taking custody of this land. And so in that moment, they were able also, because this was a British law, to take a different language, not to only rely on the British language and the British way of understanding, but to use their own speech and to enter that into history. So we were also thinking, or we found that it was interesting to think about court as a way of entering speech and reports. So for us to see those moments in 2020 or something that was happening in 1817, right? I mean, it's of course sad that this is beautiful to find and we're still needing these kind of moments, but like to see that, to receive that message somewhat 200 years later was incredible. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
That sounds wonderful, and I'd love to follow your project a bit more.
Yeah, this was Cabello Malazzi, who has worked also closely with Rux Media Collective on the Yokohama Triennale, but worked with other colleagues as part of it. Yeah, thank you, Cabello. Liz, sorry.
So Rux are friends of mine. I mean, Monica and Shuddha are friends of mine. And I enjoy the way that they, connect their more verbal and sort of, intellectual, well, their more verbal sides with their art production.
I wanted to add one part to her question that she mentioned it's not possible to for liberal other than if you are not a liberal, but I want to restructure it in a way that I am saying it's not possible to be in a position of that kind of power being a lower caste or a Dalit person. So in a, like for example, our jurisprudence, almost the whole of it was, like we say that Ambedkar has written the constitution, but historically Ambedkar was brought in later, not at the beginning. And we simply overlook that because it is advantageous for the upper caste to promote this, that Ambedkar was attached at the beginning. Also something Cabello mentioned that courtrooms are turning more into forums, but in Indian justice system, we don't really see that. So most of the time, the person who are presenting are not always, they do not always know the law or the repercussion of the system. So how do we change that? And how do we change that via dialogue and art?
So, something that isn't widely known, is that Baba Sahib Ambedkar actually worked very hard and wrote quite a lot of the Constitution. And it's for various reasons. Like, somebody was sent off to the United States because they had to be, deployed there. And somebody was sick. This is the kind of thing that happens in many of our workplaces. And it was he who did most of it. And at one point, he was being congratulated, and he just said, I just did what I was asked. It was a hack job, which was kind of interesting because, of course, it wasn't a hack job. It was a great job, right? So while there was a constituent assembly and while there were other people and, all of that, and of course, he had a lot of struggles, including with the Hindu Code Bill, which he rejected and said, I refuse to have anything to do with it. And there was a huge sense of disillusionment and disappointment he had over that. I don't think that's a space that was challenging in the way that you apprehended. Getting better lawyering, I think that's important because people's rights are being represented, right? One thing that I think is going to be quite good is video conferences, because it opens up Supreme Court litigation to somebody from Bulandshahr or, Tuticorin, somebody who's, or even somebody from a smaller place who just happens to have a phone, right? Because otherwise, Supreme Court litigation is very much dominated by us lawyers from Delhi, and the bar is a elite and small one. it'll open up litigation to, even lawyers who have small children. Like, I think we're going to be representing two lawyers, a father and, the person who's sitting next to the last question. I think she's been wanting to ask for a while. See, I can see her from here. Natasha? Hi. Let's do one last question from her because she really has been wanting to ask for a long time.
Thank you. I would say I really loved your conversation and the direction it took from the beginning. There is one question, and it's more of an open question, but I do want to ask it to you personally, because as an artist and as an artist who is beginning their career, at this point of time here in India, in this climate, not just climate, but also political and social climate, for someone who is working, advocating for people's rights in the court and actually achieving impact on ground, what role do you think artists have in this time and space? What kind of impact they can potentially make to further the notion of justice? Thank you.
I'm so happy you asked that question. The role of art and rights meets at the point where we both seek to elevate human experience. I mean, no, not elevate human experience, but help people realize their own humanity and explore their own humanity, come into our beings a little bit or a lot more. Through work that is challenging and inspiring and a mirror, or just something that makes you stop and reflect a little bit. And I think in a time of proto-fascism, art has an even more important role than it does in other times, because bringing art to communities that are underserved, making art with communities that are underserved, or bringing those artists to the center. We were talking about that, Natasha, and Gauri just sort of was talking about recently about how she is taking her art back to the communities that she creates it with. Our common friend Gauri Gill, she makes work, she's been making work in Rajasthan for many years, and she takes it back on a regular basis. She makes work with Rajeshji, who is Adivasi, and they take work back. And the way it plays out is interesting and different depending on what it is and where it is. So it's an exciting time to be a lawyer, and it's an exciting time to be an artist. And you can be endlessly subversive without breaking laws. And with regard to that, that's a whole other universe. So maybe another time. Thank you so much for having me. This was a delight.
Thank you. Also recognizing those who are unfortunately in the grasp of the law, our artists, comedians, poets, Ambedkarite activists who are unfortunately not past the grip of law, who are in prison, despite being unwell, despite losing family, despite this pandemic, just acknowledging those individuals and our common failures and hope in tackling and being bringing justice. I'd like to acknowledge the term that Denise Ferreira da Silva brought into my understanding as knowing at the limits of justice, and I'd like to hold that phrase up for those who are currently incarcerated, for hearings beyond the timeline of assigned trials, because forensics holds within it the idea of the forum, as Eyal Weissman has noted. The fact that permissible evidence is a narrow subset of evidence that is produced materially, poetically, politically in the world at every moment. And perhaps the larger release of bodies of evidence and rivers of testimony includes justice making as placemaking. And so I just wanted to continue on that note as we inhabit this present full of asymmetries. But yeah, on the note of hope as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha. Thank you, Experimenter Hub, and thank you all. Have a lovely evening.
All right. We are ending today, and we are going to go to the gallery, to Baliganj Place. And there's going to be a walkthrough of Bani Abdi's exhibition, the song, and also a performance. And maybe Priyanka wants to say a few words about that.
There's a very special walkthrough and performance at the Experimenter Baliganj Place space, so I would really urge for those of you who can make it to join us. At 6 o'clock or maybe 6:10, Natasha will lead a short walkthrough of Bani Abidi solo. And then in the terrace, there's a wonderful poet, writer, activist, Sabika Abbas Naqvi, who's come all the way from Lucknow, who will perform her poetry, which she's written specially relating to Bani's work. And you will see when you see the show, Bani has actually painted her. So it's a two-way conversation. So please don't miss this evening. There are some cars going, otherwise it's a short auto or Uber or whatever away.